Let's bring in Richard Kolko, FBI, former supervisory specialist agent for 20 years, 2 decades. Richard's now safety and security analyst and reporter. Great to have you on the programme. Welcome to France 24, Richard. First of all, just tell us what you're making of this. You've seen the footage, the speeding through security, the footage in the room. What's been going through your mind about protocol, the drill?
Well, the drill, people want to see this as a failure, and what I see is it actually as a success. The Secret Service is experts at this. It's their job to protect the president, and while it looks like it was a failure, I can assure you it wasn't. Things could have happened differently, and too bad they didn't happen differently, but the principal is protected. He was removed from the dangerous situation fairly quickly. The man never was able to broach the actual ballroom or get close to the president. So those parts happened successfully. Are there things that can be done or changed for the future, such as if the president wants to have this event within the next 30 days? Absolutely. And you can expect the Secret Service to make those changes. They're in charge of that security. FBI is in charge of the investigation, and that's kicked off at full force. Search warrants being conducted in multiple locations. Additional charges will be filed by the Department of Justice. And having found the manifesto and finding that he had alerted family members that he may have had some plans, these are all of high concern. One other thing they want to right away do is make sure nobody else was involved. Certainly a potential that he had people that he spoke with or understood what he was doing or was thinking about doing, and the FBI wants to identify all of those people in case there's any other risk to the president or any other members of the administration.
This is good to hear, Richard. This is very important to hear. And also coming from somebody who's dealt with huge disasters, that you've responded to major incidents in the past, 1996 Olympic bombing in Atlanta included. Because there are armchair FBI agents right now on social media looking at this footage, looking at the reaction time of some of these guards, as it seems, and seeing this kind of speeding through as people are kind of missing eye contact. But what you're saying, and frame it for us, is perhaps, would you agree, there are still questions about that initial moment, but in the instances afterwards, that was exemplary, as you see it?
Yeah, listen, when this actually happens, people are always, just a little shocked that it occurred. But I think that's more the people that were attending the event that were shocked. The people that are trained to do this, the Secret Service agents, the police, law enforcement that was located in the hotel, they acted as quick as they possibly could. I mean, the only thing I see that, the Secret Service may review is, where we saw him run through that portion of the hotel. Maybe they could have had a serpentine there, some way to slow anybody down from walking through. That's the footage you're showing right now where he was running through. And, potentially they would change that. But again, that's a Secret Service job. That's what they're experts at. The FBI wants to be experts at identifying these people, not after they do it, but before they do it. And it takes intelligence. It takes leads. It takes people picking up the phone and calling law enforcement, letting them know that this kind of person may be thinking of doing this. That's what's important. I want to stop this before it happens.
And for those trying to understand and scratching their heads about the Washington Hilton and knowing that there is a kind of legacy around it with Reagan and an assassination attempt in the past, and having a hotel at the same time allowing guests to check in. If you were reviewing this now, this is going to go ahead next year, would you be allowing the two things to happen at the same time?
Yes, I would. They've got decades of doing this. What they do is they run the names. The Secret Service pulls all the names of everybody who's listed in the hotel, as well as those who may have made reservations and didn't show up. And they can check those names against databases to see if there's any alerts, any what we call derogatory information that would alert the Secret Service or the FBI that there could potentially be a problem. What we've heard so far is there wasn't on this person, Alan, but we also heard that he had written a manifesto. He had notified family members, and the family members may have, actually picked up the phone and called the police with some concerns. But maybe the information was so new it hadn't made it into the computer where it could be checked yet. So yeah, there are things that need to be changed, should be changed. But this is what and we've all heard this term, soft target. You cannot perfectly protect a soft target. There are always going to be vulnerabilities, and that's where it comes down to preparation and training and expertise. And that's what the people that were working at that location last night had, and that's why they were able to stop him from getting any further past the magnetometers or even worse into the ballroom. So it looks bad, but in reality, it worked.
When we look at the footage of the security agents taking the administration officials, first of all taking J.D. Vance, the vice president, then they come back, it appears, for President Trump, or at least there's a few seconds delay. What are you making of that? And I guess as a layman, we're wondering why that happened that way round.
Well, the different agents are assigned different principals. They have their responsibilities, and it may have just been how they were located. One thing there's several things going on here. One thing they don't want to do is they don't want to leave a bad situation and go to a worse situation. So they've got to do an assessment. What are they dealing with right there? Just grabbing your principal and the president, vice president, other administrative officials, and running out the back door may not be the right thing. They could be running into something worse. The person who could come through the door could be a diversion. So they've got to do an assessment before they just kick open the doors and run outside to jump into the cars. If it was a diversion and they're running into an ambush. So they plan and prepare for every eventuality and something like that. But, having that perimeter, that very large perimeter, you have to understand that before just the hotel, there's counter surveillance that's going on within blocks of the hotel. There are police cars that have, in the United States, license plate readers. They're checking the license plates of any suspicious cars, any suspicious people that may be hanging out near the hotel. And then right outside the door and then inside the lobby. So there's very different layers of this security that have to be checked, prepared, and work. And yeah, it worked, and he made it through the first door. Interestingly enough, he traveled by train from California to Washington, D.C. That means he didn't have to get on an airplane where the weapons would have been an issue. Obviously, he didn't want to drive, but on our trains in America, you don't go through the metal detectors. Maybe that's something they'll want to look at in the future. There may be changes coming up, but right now, this went as well as a terrible situation could go.
Richard, I want to just stay with us because I want to get the take of David, who was there, just in terms of first experience security. We're talking, David, with Richard about the drill. He's mentioned the metal detectors. When you were going in, I've heard one of my old colleagues, Gary O'Donoghue at the BBC, saying that something went off. There was a metal detector went off, or something beeped, basically scanned on his jacket, but they allowed him through anyway. He said it was cursory, the glances. What did you experience when you were being checked as you went through security?
Yeah, interestingly, at first, the security actually seemed tighter to me than normal. I've been doing this for many years, and on this occasion, they were asking for my ticket for me to show that, even at the perimeter of the hotel before entering the hotel grounds, before getting on the driveway. And then once I was inside, I was asked to show it a few more times. I also went through that metal detector. I think it went off. I was wanded, so to speak. And in my experience, sometimes these events with the president, they do a sort of almost cursory check. They think if you've come this far, you're probably there for a reason. But for me personally, it was relatively rigorous and not out of the ordinary. However, I would say, structurally, there is an issue with this event in that it's at a functioning hotel. When you go in this year or any year, you're mixing with members of the public who are sitting in the hotel bar and restaurants. It's a novelty for them to see the Washington political class kind of wandering through. I saw the White House communications director standing in a public area in the bar just yesterday, and obviously it does appear that this particular attacker was staying at the hotel and exploiting that particular loophole. But just some other context. Obviously, this hotel was the scene of the attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan 45 years ago, just outside. My understanding is that since then it's been fortified and made more secure, certainly for the way that the president enters and leaves the building. And that's why, even though we as journalists sometimes grumble about this venue, the very poor phone reception in the basement, You'll often hear people say that the food is not that great, but one of the reasons the dinner always happens there is at least a perception of relatively tight security, and also obviously the size and the scale of it. But now I think that security will come under fresh scrutiny, even though the White House, the Justice Department is making the case, well, actually, ultimately, the security measures did work. Yes, this was dangerous and very terrifying for people, but this man was stopped before he reached the ballroom itself.
Richard, one thing that strikes me, and this is obviously a very good thing for journalists, is the transparency, availability of President Trump. I think it's something like 3 times a day on average. There are public viewing moments, some of them in the White House, others elsewhere. But I imagine if you're trying to manage that in comparison with, presidents gone by, Biden, Obama, what's your take on those still in the industry? Is this a real headache time, the availability, the amount of time with the public or with reporters where he could be perhaps more exposed?
I can promise you that every Secret Service agent wishes they could just lock the president in the White House and never let him out. Then you'd be 100% secure. But that's just not going to happen. All presidents are politicians. They have to interact with the media, with the public. And at the end of the day, they're the boss, and they get to say where they're going to go. This hotel that has been used for decades is secure. They've made some of those changes. The problem, and I think they should look at the more problematic things, is 2 years ago when we had the issue in Butler, Pennsylvania, where they took a shot at then candidate Trump. Those are much more complex to secure. Those pop-up sites where you're working with different law enforcement, you don't necessarily have as much time to prepare, test, and drill. Those are much harder. That's what really concerns the Secret Service. This hotel, where they've run through this drill so many times, so many years, worked with their partners, communications work, emergency teams are already in place, actually much simpler to prepare for and protect. So again, it did work. Everybody wishes it didn't happen, but it worked because they prepared, because they planned.
Let me get a final thought from you, Richard, before you go, because it's very interesting just to getting your take, and certainly you will still have contacts within the FBI. And I want to ask you about a wider question, which is the reports around the FBI Chief Kash Patel and the article that we've seen recently, basically questioning his competence in the job and questions his ability, whether it's factors of drink, his paranoia, which he denies. He's suing as a result of that. But I wonder whether you're feeling that there is pressure within the FBI now. I'm not linking it to the same thing, but I'm interested in your general thought about the morale within your old company.
I know a lot of people have left the FBI since the change of administration. Mr. Patel, Director Patel, was confirmed by the Senate and is serving in the role he was confirmed for, the president's choice. And any issues that come up from any investigative reporting by various reporters, that'll come out in the wash eventually, whether, to find out if it's true or not true, but certainly beyond my level of expertise to speak about.
Pleasure to talk to you tonight, Richard. Thank you for your time. Richard Kolko, 20 years FBI Special Agent, now security analyst, reporter as well. Good to speak to you. We'll speak to you soon. Let's bring in Doug at this point as well. Doug, Herbert's been listening to very interesting listening to Richard, first of all. What did you make of that?
Yeah, well, first of all, right now, the debate is on whether it was a security failure, right, or as the White House asserts, actually everything worked perfectly. The video footage obviously is dramatic. If you don't have the context, you see someone, it looks like they're just bursting right through, racing past the Secret Service and a security checkpoint. But in fact, he never got into the ballroom. So I think that's a major takeaway here. At the end of the day, no matter how bad the optics are, no matter how bad it looks, no matter how much it's fueling a narrative about security lapses, fact of the matter is he did not get into the ballroom, which is not to say it was any less stressful or alarming for those who are inside. And as our reporting showing, as we just heard David talk about, you hear these loud noises, this pop, 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 you're dashing and plunging under a table. Obviously, that must be some terrifying moments there. But at the end of the day, as we heard Richard talking about, on a purely security level, yeah, the security seemed to work, which is not to say that they're not going to examine it again. But in the wake of these incidences, you're always talking about what didn't work, and often with many presidents, we don't hear about any of these attempted assassination attempts, alleged assassination attempts, because they were foiled, because the security worked, because we never got the optics on it, the surveillance footage, the memes, the reposted on social media, that type of footage. It just didn't happen. If the tree falls in the forest and you're not there to hear it doesn't make a noise. Same thing with a lot of these attempts. We don't know about them. We talk about this with terror attacks too, right? We don't know about it. We don't hear about it because they're successfully foiled. In this case, we saw bad optics, but he didn't get into the ballroom. So you could make the case on either side. It looks really scary, and it was scary for those people inside. But from a purely technical security standpoint, as Richard was saying, at the end of the day, those doors were closed. He did not get into the ballroom.
Mm-hmm. I thought on the where the rhetoric moves on to, and you've looked at this. You go to Butler, Pennsylvania, a couple of years ago. You look at the incident on the golf course in Florida as well, and look at this. The rapid reaction time of President Trump, the kind of the weave-in action as well, straight on to other issues. Almost like sometimes it appears, you might be watching things, talking about a third person other than himself. You know, he's asked about what he thinks of how close it was. He also then talks about the ballroom and how necessary the ballroom is. What are you making of that?
Donald Trump, he clearly, there's something in him that thrives on the telling of the tale, right? He made his name in reality TV, The Apprentice. He likes to talk, we know that, and he likes to talk about himself, for better or for worse. And these apparent assassination attempts, whether it turns out that they were actually targeting him, officials in administration, whatever the actual motives are, we're only in the very beginning phases of an investigation right now. All this will presumably be borne out by the subsequent investigation. But what we are getting the sense of is that Donald Trump has drawn political fuel, almost rocket fuel, from a lot of these assassination attempts. And while he was definitely solemn in his remarks last night, he was not speaking he didn't seem traumatized. He seemed like a president who wanted to talk about what had just happened. And, you know, we knew with Butler afterwards, he talked and talked about it. You know, the covering of his ear, it almost became a meme, and people showed up at the Republican convention with empathetic ear badges among the Republican delegates there. You'll remember this. So he seems to, even as he tells the tale of what happened to him, and he praises the Secret Service, he even praised the reporters for their initial coverage of what happened inside. You don't hear him saying nice things about the press too often. But even as he's doing that, there's also a sense that he is, if not martyring himself, there is a certain sense of self-referential egocentricity in the way he tells it. In this case, comparing himself to Abraham Lincoln, saying it's great presidents that have a great impact. I think he used the word impactful presidents who really try to do something, who end up being targets in American history. The other presidents who do less, who aren't impactful, aren't the ones that are targeted. So he sort of makes this about himself, and he also used it for his ballroom, right? He said that this sort of is the latest example of why, in his view, you need that ballroom built, that controversial ballroom now being challenged in litigation, why you need it being built, because it will be presumably bulletproof and drone-proof and have the type of security in place that the Hilton Hotel, no matter how good or bad the security was last night, simply doesn't match. So you have Donald Trump really almost telling a narrative. Remember, he appeared at this White House press conference last night. I think it was 10:31 p.m. when he walked out in front of the podium before reporters, gave that sort of ad hoc press conference. And this incident happened a little after 8 p.m. and he was kept at the Hilton Hotel. Presumably he was in lockdown. They weren't moving with him outside until everything had been cleared. I think he was there for over an hour and a half after the actual incident occurred, meaning they weren't ready to move him back to the White House. But as soon as he got back to the White House, within minutes, he was back on that sort of PR, Donald Trump wanting to tell the tale of what happened to him in his own way, sort of trying to seize the narrative, perhaps control that narrative, and use it to perhaps his own political advantage.
Doug, thank you. We'll speak to you in the next few hours because this is developing rapidly through the evening. Doug, for now, thank you, our international affairs commentator. Meanwhile, President Trump